But, there's questions with him in terms of a long-term contract. So if you're being honest with yourself and you know that you're not a contending team right now and you don't think you're going to extend him, then what are you doing with the guy? You're going to let him go for nothing, or are you going to try to flip him for something? So it's just food for thought. This is not me, having a torch and pitchfork declaring that the Boston Bruins have to trade Pavel Zacha right now. I'm just saying, extend him or trade him. Do not carry this out.
You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 49 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. There was a blockbuster trade in the NHL on Sunday, and so today I want to talk about which ways the Boston Bruins should not react to the rich getting richer in the Atlantic Division. Also, will the Bruins be active in the trade market during draft week? And a mailbag Q&A with you, the listeners. All of that and much more. But first things first, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X at @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or leave a comment on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. Now, before we get started on anything else, we have to begin with Monday's announcement of Patrice Bergeron to be inducted into the 2026 Hockey Hall of Fame, a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, last week, when it was announced his number was being raised to the Garden Rafters, I spent some time talking about Bergeron's career and what he meant to me growing up in New England and watching him from a kid into early adulthood, and why he is a Hall of Fame player, person, professional, all of those things. And I think we all agree that Bergeron is more than worthy of being a first ballot Hall of Famer. 6 Selke awards. The trophy should be named after him going forward. Stanley Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist, World Junior champion, World Cup of Hockey champion, and he's just an all-timer. He really was an all-time player. So fortunate to have watched him. I think we all are. One of the greatest Bruins to ever do it. Two-way player, the best defensive forward that I've ever watched in my lifetime. And honestly, in terms of Bruins forwards, maybe ever will, right? That's how special of a player that he was in Boston. And it really is something when defensive forwards that are coming up as prospects, whether it's high school or college or juniors or whatever, and anybody now who's a two-way player, they kind of get compared to, well, they kind of play like Bergeron. Not that anybody's saying that those players are going to become Bergeron, but it's the ultimate compliment where there's a generation of players behind you and you're the model of what a two-way player could one day potentially be if lucky. And of course, there's only one Patrice Bergeron and only will ever be one Patrice Bergeron, but you understand what I'm saying, right? So that's the type of player and talent that he was, the type of leader he was, person he was. And as I said, very well deserving of a first ballot Hall of Fame induction in November of 2026. I believe that's when it is. So to no surprise, really. And last week when his number was announced to be raised to the rafters, I had mentioned then that this announcement was inevitable early this week. And so there it is. So feel free to comment your favorite Patrice Bergeron memories, what you enjoyed most about his game. For me, it's the details and it's the effort. A lot of players have good skill, good talent. They have great skating ability or great hands or a hell of a shot, or they're a power forward or tough as nails, all those things, right? A lot of players have one attribute or two, but not the others. And I just don't think that you can really be that successful of a player. This probably goes across all sports, really. But you need to have a high IQ for the game that you're playing. And you can have all the talent in the world, but if you can't think the game, then there's a cap on what you can accomplish and where you can get to. But if you have the ultimate IQ for your sport and maybe you're lesser than in certain specific attributes, you can make up for it, right? Patrice Bergeron was not the fastest player. He did not have the hardest shot. He didn't have the best hands. He wasn't the most physical, but he thought the game better than just about anybody from his generation. And his second and third efforts and fourth efforts were up there against the best, right? A lot of guys have a good first effort and a okay second effort, but it's the third effort and the fourth efforts that's where special players can really be made. And so Bergeron did all of those things, all of those individual skills. He was a good skater. He had good hands. He had a good shot, but he didn't have the best in any of those. But you combine being really good at everything with an all-world compete and an all-world head for the game. And then it takes execution, right? And Bergeron he was a pleasure, true pleasure to watch. As I mentioned last week, it was all threatened pretty early on when he had that season-ending injury 5-6 games into the season back in 2007, 2008. That very scary hit from behind from Randy Jones of the Flyers, and you watched that live, and you just couldn't help but think that he was potentially paralyzed from that hit, and it ended up being a very severe concussion, of course. But he came back from that injury, took him some time, took him a couple of seasons to really get back into the player he was before the injury. And from there, it was just clutch performer, ultimate leader, Hall of Famer, right? Being a first ballot Hall of Famer says it all right there, right? There's only so many of those. Among players that are good enough and fortunate enough to be in the Hall, how many of them are first ballot guys? Truly. So good for Patrice Bergeron. Wanted to start off with that right away. And again, leave your comments, your favorite memories, your favorite attributes about him. So there's that. Now, as I said, there was a blockbuster trade in the NHL on Sunday. I've mentioned in recent weeks that I have been fully expecting a very chaotic draft week and free agency week this summer in the NHL. It just feels like, with trade rumors galore and players putting in trade requests and this and that there's going to be a lot of movement this week. And I'm sure that between this episode airing and my next one on Friday, I think is when it will be, I'm sure there'll be more. But right now, the only one that's happened in terms of a blockbuster trade is Brady Tkachuk going from the Ottawa Senators to join his brother Matthew in Florida. And this trade, trades like this are always surprising. It's a blockbuster deal. You're never really expecting the blockbusters unless there's a public trade request. I think Brady Tkachuk not finishing his career as an Ottawa Senator is less surprising, but the way that this all went down is semi-surprising. And the fact that he goes to Florida, of course he does. It's Bill Zito. You have to tip your cap to him. He moves, and he moves fast, and he knows what he wants, and he recognizes the window that his team is in, and he's going to do everything that he can to maximize that. And it doesn't hurt when you are in a tax-free state and the sun is always shining and the team's really good. But I will be fair here. Florida's always been a tax-free state, and there's always been sun shining in the state of Florida and Dallas and California and Vegas and others. And there was a lot of years where these teams were not desirable, right? So the great equalizer is winning. So when you have a winning culture and it's in those environments with those perks, now you're cooking with gas. But there was a long time where nobody ever wanted to go to Tampa Bay or Florida or Carolina or whatever. So the whole tax-free thing, it's valid to an extent, but I don't know. It's more of a new thing in recent years now that the teams are good. In any event, Brady Tkachuk goes to the Florida Panthers for 2 first-round picks in 2025, 9 and 25 overall, and a second-round pick in 2030, and then a first-round pick in 2029. Now, I want to specify real quick because there was a trade earlier in the day that allowed Florida to get 25 overall, and that was sending Mackie Samoskevich to the Seattle Kraken for the 25th overall pick in this year's draft and a conditional second-round pick in 2027. I want to come back to that in a little bit in terms of what that could mean for the Bruins this week. But for now, let's stick with Brady Tkachuk going to Florida and the impact that has, not just on the Bruins and the Senators, but the Atlantic Division as a whole. Because the Ottawa Senators, they're a good team. They've been to the playoffs for 2 straight years, and analytically, they've been among some of the better teams in the league in terms of scoring chances generated for versus those given up. And they've also been a pretty disciplined team. So Ottawa, it's interesting. They clearly had conversations with Brady Tkachuk, and he requested a trade, and he's under contract or was under contract with Ottawa for another couple of seasons, but they just wanted to get out from under it now, and they had a very short list of teams to trade Brady to, and they just wanted to move on. They knew the inevitable with Brady wanting to be out of Ottawa, and they just wanted to move on and get as much for him. And I want to get to a comment from Elliot Friedman because he talked about this on his 32 Thoughts podcast about the return for Brady Tkachuk, because it does seem a bit light, right? And the plan going forward for the Ottawa Senators, because they are still trying to be competitive. They are not taking steps back here. They're not a rebuilding team. So yes, they moved on from their captain, who's one of the better power forwards, if not the premier power forward in the NHL right now. But what does it mean for the Ottawa Senators? And indirectly, what does that mean for the Boston Bruins? Let's get to Elliot's comments first and foremost.
Stales just took the best deal he could get. The true judge of this deal, Kyle, is what they do with these picks.
Mm-hmm.
They'll try to add. So I think it's not going to be Brady Tkachuk for 3 firsts and a second. It's going to be Brady Tkachuk for whatever these picks get you.
So the Senators, they now have the 9th overall pick from Florida. They have the 25th overall pick from Florida in this year's draft. And then, as I mentioned, they have a first rounder in 2029 and a second round pick in 2030. Also, that first round pick in 2029, I'm pretty sure it's top 10 protected. So again, this just really is, I don't want to use the term fleecing, but it's certainly a trade that heavily favors the Florida Panthers. And the reason why, and you heard Elliot say it off the top, that there were no NHL roster players received by the Senators in exchange for Brady Tkachuk. And that's because, as Elliot said, the Senators did the best that they could do. And Brady Tkachuk had a full no movement clause, so he had to give permission to be traded. And there were a handful of teams that he is said to have told Ottawa he would go to. Surprise, surprise, Vegas, Florida. Who was the other one? I think it was Carolina and Minnesota. Was it maybe Minnesota or Dallas or something like that? Either way, all teams that are very popular to want to go to right now. And it really kind of feels like Brady just wanted to go to Florida. So the Senators, had to trade him for whatever they could get from the Panthers. And the fact that Ottawa would have asked for somebody like Anton Lundell, and Florida just clearly said no. So the Panthers knew that they had the Senators by the cajoons here. Now, you could make the argument, well, Ottawa didn't have to trade Brady. They could have ridden this out for a little bit and figured it out later, and that's not untrue. I just think that when your captain wants out and the locker room knows he wants out and the fan base and the media knows he wants out, it just creates a toxic environment that I don't think the Senators, and understandably so, want to create heading into next season, right? You kind of want to rip the Band-Aid off and move on. When a player says that they want out, man, you got to try to find the right time to do it and for the best return. But there is pressure on a team to move him because, like I said, especially when the player is that important, like the captain, you're seeing the same thing with Detroit and Dylan Larkin. When it's your captain, you got to find a way to move on, right? It's too much of a distraction. If it's a fourth liner who wants out, okay, that's one thing. So the Senators, they recuperated 3 first-round picks, 2 in this draft, 1 in the top 10, and a first-round pick in 29 and a second-round pick in 2030. As you heard Elliot Friedman say here, and this is why it ties into the Bruins, Ottawa doesn't seem like they're satisfied with those picks being the return for Brady. They're going to try to turn those into something else. And could that be something else that the Bruins also have their eyes on, right? You see speculation about Mason McTavish being on Ottawa's radar, a guy that Bruins fans and we all kind of feel like the Bruins could try to target. There's speculation out there that now that Ottawa has $25 million in cap space and they have the draft collateral to do so, that they might be in line to send a massive offer sheet Jason Robertson's way. Because also on 32 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman said that I would expect some offer sheets this summer. Usually it's taboo, but the NHL it's changing right now. It's changing. Hell, you had Vegas's GM pretty much making fun of other teams in the media at his end of season press conference last week, calling out Seattle, saying that they couldn't do as an expansion team what Vegas has done, calling other teams jealous of Vegas. And I mean, I'm sure that other teams around the league wouldn't mind sticking it to Vegas if they could. And they're kind of in a cap situation of their own, and they have some players that they have to sign too, but that's a story for maybe a little bit later on in this podcast. But as it pertains to Ottawa, yeah, I think they'll try to be in on Jason Robertson. Now, I think I saw somebody from the fourth period, or maybe it was Daily Faceoff, I think it was David Pagnotta, maybe said that he's not so sure that Jason Robertson would even want to sign an extension with the Senators. Not the most desirable location probably for many players around the league for one reason or the other. So ultimately, Ottawa can want Robertson all they want, but if he doesn't sign on with them, then they don't get him. So my point is, the Florida Panthers are already heading into this season before the Brady Tkachuk deal, in my opinion, the best team in the Eastern Conference and probably the NHL when healthy. You add Brady Tkachuk to that mix, and they're just going to be, at least on paper, you never know what happens with injuries or whatnot again, but if Florida stays relatively healthy, I just think that they're clearly the favorite out of the Eastern Conference, and they're a team that wasn't even in the playoffs this past year that the Bruins had to worry about. So the Panthers they'll be somebody to be reckoned with, and Ottawa's going to try to get better. We know Toronto's trying to get better right now. We know Tampa Bay is trying to get better to keep up with the Joneses. There's a lot of speculation that people around the league would be surprised if John Carlson doesn't end up in Tampa Bay. We know Darren Radish already had a sign and trade to Toronto. Now Brady Tkachuk to Florida. We'll see what the Sabres do. We'll see what the Senators do. But what are the Bruins going to do? And this is why it all kind of comes back to what I said earlier on, which is the Bruins need to be careful here. in their efforts to try to better their team. They see the rich getting richer with the Florida Panthers in their division. They see Toronto getting better this offseason. They know that Montreal and Buffalo are ahead of them. They know Ottawa is right there with them, right? The Bruins need to remember and have a bit of a reality check here that they are pretty far away from the top teams in the league right now. And if they want to go out there and make a big splash, that's one thing, okay? I don't think any of us here would be that opposed to the Bruins bringing in a true impact player in their prime for the right price. So, for example, if the Bruins, and maybe some of you disagree here, but if the Bruins want to bring in Jason Robertson and send him an offer sheet, personally, I'm for that, okay? Maybe others aren't, but that's an example of, okay, at least that's a big swing, right? He's an elite scoring winger. But if their answer to Florida going out there and getting Brady Tkachuk after they were already, in my opinion, the best team in the Eastern Conference when healthy, if their answer to that is going to be, oh man, we got to trade for Vinny Trocheck now and sign Jacob Trouba in free agency or sign Rasmus Anderson in free agency, like that to me is the worst case scenario for the Boston Bruins, because you're gonna have to give up assets to get Vinny Trocheck. He's not a free agent, so you're gonna go out there and trade for Vinny Trocheck. And I'm not trying to come down on something that the Bruins haven't done yet, but we've all seen the Bruins linked to interest in Vinny Trocheck, and my fear is that Dylan Larkin is going to end up in Minnesota or maybe Dallas, okay? But maybe he ends up in Minnesota. That seems like a pretty good fit to go play with Quinn Hughes and Matt Boldy and Brock Faber and his other USA teammates. And then Vinny Trocheck, who Minnesota has also been rumored to have interest in, all of a sudden doesn't go to Minnesota because Larkin's in Minnesota. And so now he's available. And the Bruins look at it and say, oh, there's our guy. Vinny's not in Minnesota. Let's trade for him. And now we have Trocheck and Zacha and Elias Lindholm just standing on a stomping down on the Bruins youth, trying to get some experience, and which is what really matters to the Bruins right now. Truly. I mean, yes, add to this team if you can in an impactful way, but beyond that, it's not about, the Bruins shouldn't be about the Elias Lindholms and the Vinny Trochecks right now. They should be about the Fraser Mintons and the James Hagans, and maybe in a year's time, like a Dean Letourneau. So I'll leave it there for right now. I just don't want the Bruins to see other teams making big moves for horses, and then the Bruins are sitting there, trying to make moves for a couple of ponies. And it's just not, it's like, how many times can we see them do this? So again, I don't want to blame them for something that they haven't done yet. It's just my fear. I hope that they don't do that. And if they can't land a Jason Robertson, or listen, Zach Werenski's name has kind of been out there a little bit. Is he on the move? I don't know, because neither of us are part of these GM group chats. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. If the reigning Norris Trophy winner, and who was also the runner-up the year before, if he's available for a trade, okay, like that's certainly an impact guy in the back end. I mentioned Jason Robertson because I don't know if anybody else is really out there in an impactful way at forward, especially at center. I know Robertson's a winger, but Dylan Larkin, we all know he's requested a trade. Got it. But there's no reason to think that he's coming to Boston, because to this point, because the Bruins name hasn't been linked at all. The Bruins were on his short list, and to be frank, I don't think the Bruins should give up any of their top prospects for Larkin, because I think it would be short-sighted. So I just don't think that should be a marriage right now on either side. Larkin wants to win. And right now the Bruins are anything but a guarantee to be a contender. They're not a contender at all right now, right? Going to a contender doesn't mean you're going to win a championship. It just gives you a good chance to probably contend for one. And that's all Larkin wants. And I don't think he's going to get that assurance in Boston, not after being in Detroit for a decade. So I just don't see that match. Robert Thomas, I would be floored if he's traded. I just don't see it. So I can't count on that. Nico Hischier is having positive momentum with an extension with the Devils. Austin Matthews, clearly, based on the moves that Toronto has been trying to do, they're trying to be aggressive. I don't think Matthews is going anywhere, at least to start next season. McDavid and Draisaitl, who are we kidding? They're going to be in Edmonton to start next season. I would be blown away if that wasn't the case. How about some franchise RFA centers like a Connor Bedard or a Leo Carlson? They're not moving. They're the franchise for their teams, and they're not going anywhere. So from where I sit, and tell me if I'm wrong, it really feels like the only two top centers potentially available based on their skill set would be a Dylan Larkin. And for all the reasons I just said, I don't think he's coming to Boston. Or the gamble in all capital letters of Elias Pettersson, where it sounds like Elias Pettersson, that Vancouver would be willing to eat salary there. And he does have just over 500 career points in 540 something games in his career. I understand the risk there, the gamble. I'm just saying, for conversation's sake, Dylan Larkin, Elias Pettersson, I think those are the only external options that could be out there for the Bruins, I think, for a top line center, right? So if they're not getting any of those guys, whether it's because you don't want them to or the Bruins just don't, so where are they getting a top center from? They're not. So that's why I think that the next best thing is to surround Minton and Higgins with elite wingers in Pasternak and Robertson, and, kind of go from there, and also try to build on the back end. So I would be okay with the Bruins taking a swing on Jason Robertson. In fact, I think that's kind of the only realistic big fish that they could probably take a swing on based off what we know currently. And there's going to be a lot of teams, I think, that are going to be interested in Jason Robertson. So again, outside of that, I think the Bruins are better off being just patient. And yes, if there are smart hockey trades out there where you're going younger and betting on upside, go for it. I'm all about that. But what they can't do is try to go out there and, step in the ring with Florida because they got Vinny Trocheck and Jacob Trouba or Rasmus Anderson. It's just, they'll get eaten alive. So that's my caution to the wind regarding the Bruins and how they should not react to the rich getting richer in the Atlantic Division. Now, something else I wanted to touch on real quick is, could the Bruins make a trade or two this week as the draft approaches? Casey Middlestad, if you remember, in my mock off season, I had the Bruins trading him to Seattle for a second-round pick. Now, it doesn't have to be Seattle. It could be anybody. I just think that clearing Casey Middlestad's cap space of $5.75 million would be advantageous to the Bruins, because I don't think he's a long-term part of this team, and he has one more year left on his deal. So I just think that if the Bruins are in or around a playoff spot next year, they're not going to trade Middlestad then. And I don't think they're going to extend him beyond next season. I just don't think he's a fixture for them long-term. So if the Bruins could try to trade him this week for a second-round pick to somebody, I don't think you're going to get a first-round pick for him, but maybe a second-round pick, and then maybe you can package that second for something else or use it. I don't really know. But I think that's something that the Bruins could do. I see Mason Lohrei, obviously, is somebody that the Bruins are dangling this offseason. And I wanted to circle back to the Mackie Samoskevich trade from Florida to Seattle, because he's a third-line player, and Florida got a first-round pick for him. Now, granted, it's a 25th overall pick, so it's the bottom third of the draft, but still. And it makes me just ask the question, so what could you get for Pavel Zacha? Now, I'm not sitting here saying right now to trade Pavel Zacha. It's just a conversation. If I'm looking at this objectively, there's three options with Zacha. Two are acceptable, one is not. Option one, that would be acceptable. Not saying that everybody would prefer it. I'm just saying it would be understandable, would be the Bruins extending him. Okay. He's 29 going on 30. He's a legit second line center in the NHL, capable of playing top line minutes if need be. He plays in all situations, and he's averaged about 57 points a year for the Bruins the last 4 seasons. So, he's been on a very good cap hit at under $5 million, and he would certainly get a pretty good raise to at least probably 6.5 going forward for about 7 or 8 years. So you have to be cautious of that. But if the Bruins decide to extend him, they're going to have to, live and die with that move. The other acceptable option would be to trade him because he has 1 year left in his deal. Now, I know people are going to say, well, Brian, where are you going to replace his 55, 60 points from and all of his situational minutes that he plays? And the Bruins need centers, not to get rid of them. And the Bruins need top 6 talent, not to get rid of it. And I understand all of that. What I will tell you is that if the Boston Bruins don't think, and they should have a good idea of this right now because there's projections out there and they know they're in talks with his agent. The Bruins know where Pavel Zacha's camp, or they have an idea at least of where Pavel Zacha's camp is going to come for negotiations. Like they're going to know what they're asking for in terms of AAV and term. He's able to extend in July of, I want to say this summer. So the Bruins know what Zacha's camp is asking for, and they know if they have an appetite for that. If they don't, and you don't plan on extending him, and you keep him this year, and you're a playoff bubble team, and you make the playoffs or you don't, but in doing so, you don't trade him because it'll ruin your chances to make the playoffs, and then you lose him for nothing in the offseason next summer. That to me is terrible, 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 fireable asset management by the Bruins. Because if they were a contender this year, that's one thing. Sometimes if you're a contender, it's worth holding on to somebody in a contract year and risk letting them walk if there could be a championship for it. But the Bruins are not going to be a contender this coming season, barring anything crazy this offseason, which I don't think any of us could foresee. And so I just think the Bruins need to either extend him or trade him. And I don't see them trading him at the deadline unless the Bruins are having a shit year. And I don't think anybody wants them to have a shit year. So, like I said, extend him or trade him. And one of the areas where you could possibly trade him is this week during the draft week, because shit happens. You just saw Brady Tkachuk get traded. So, I understand Zacha's a good player and that getting rid of a center, getting rid of top 6 talent right now when you need it doesn't make much sense unless there's other shoes to drop and other dominoes to fall. And so I don't want to speculate too much, but I just asked the question, what would Zacha be worth? And should the Bruins be seriously fielding calls on him? Right? I think you have to. Nobody's untouchable. Pavel Zacha has not been a good playoff performer for the Bruins. I know he's been good in the regular season, but there's questions with him in terms of a long-term contract. So if you're being honest with yourself and you know that you're not a contending team right now, and you don't think you're going to extend him, then what are you doing with the guy? You're going to let him go for nothing? Or are you going to try to flip him for something? So it's just food for thought. This is not me, having a torch and pitchfork declaring that the Boston Bruins have to trade Pavel Zacha right now. I'm just saying, extend him or trade him. Do not carry this out and ride the fence and then keep him for what you hope is a wild card playoff appearance again. And then you lose in the first round and he's gone in the offseason, or you miss the playoffs and he's gone in the offseason because you didn't trade him at the deadline. And I'm telling you guys, if the Bruins are playoff hopefuls, whether that means that they're in the playoffs at the time of the trade deadline or they're right on the cusp, you think they're going to trade Zacha then? No. So if you're going to trade him, you're going to do it in this offseason, I think, because you can't really count on them having a shit year and then being sellers at the deadline. If they do, it'll be accidental, right? So food for thought. Samoskevich goes for the 25th overall pick and a conditional second. What does Zacha go for? Let's go to Derek on Twitter, who says, honestly, with Higgins, Minton, Letourneau down the middle in the very near future and for years to come, building a strong D-core to allow them to make mistakes and grow and surrounding with top-tier wingers is the answer. So, Derek, I have to agree here. Like, truly, for all the reasons I said earlier, I just don't see the Bruins getting a true number one center externally right now, because I just don't think Dylan Larkin's going to Boston. And Dylan Larkin's he's a good 1C. He's not an elite 1C, but he would be a 1C. But I just don't see him coming to Boston. And then Elias Pettersson, listen, maybe the Bruins view him with some salary retention. He's 27 years old. He's been a 100-point guy in the NHL. As I said, he's got over 500 points in just about 545 games in his NHL career. The kid knows how to score. I think that Vancouver's just been such a dumpster fire that I think a lot of players have checked out there. JT Miller, checked out. Quinn Hughes, checked out. Jake DeBrusk's been there for a cup of coffee. He wants out. Okay, good luck there, Jake. I'm sure you'll work hard wherever else you go. Brock Besser, I'm sure he's probably looking for a change of scenery at some point. I was surprised Besser re-signed in Vancouver when he did last summer, because it was very evident that they were going absolutely nowhere, and he signed another 6 or 7 year deal for them. So, but in any event, I don't know what is going on or has gone on with Elias Pettersson. Was it a situation where he didn't see eye to eye with JT Miller, and then as the team just got worse and worse, things snowballed, and it's just a toxic situation, not just for him, but for everybody? Maybe. Like I said, their captain requested a trade from there. JT Miller wanted out, right? So is it a crippling red flag behind the scenes with Elias Pettersson, or is it more surface level and he just needs a change of scenery and just really hates Vancouver? Because if it's the latter, then that happens all the time, and he definitely has talent. But outside of, not to go on a tangent there, but outside of Larkin or Elias Pettersson, again, I just maybe Austin Matthews requests a trade if things go south early next year for Toronto. Maybe McDavid or Draisaitl hate the Mike Babcock experience in Edmonton and they want out next summer. I can't foresee these things, but as far as right now, I just don't know who externally the Bruins would have at 1C to acquire outside of a Larkin or a Pettersson. So therefore, yeah, I think you have to hope that it's your young guys, it's your Mintons, your Hagans, your Letourneaus, that they can be your future down the middle. And honestly, in some ways, your present. And yeah, maybe you take a swing on a Jason Robertson, and you have him and David Pastrnak as two of the best wingers production-wise in hockey. Not every team can say that. Most teams can't. In fact, I don't know if any team could say that they have 295-plus point wingers on their team. So maybe you build around the wing, and then you have Morgan Geekie as a secondary, winger scorer. And, you try to build, a good back end, and that would be a challenge too. But where your mind is at, Derek, I just think, barring anything crazy happening, that's kind of what they have to do. So I co-sign here. Carb-loaded pasta on Twitter says, I really do believe losing out on the Maple Leafs pick for this draft butchered their potential plans. I just don't see how you can compete in the East with Florida, Tampa, Carolina, Montreal. I'm concerned this Tkachuk move is going to cause a panic move by Sweeney. So to the conversation I had earlier, I hope that's not the case, right? I hope that Don Sweeney's attempt to keep up with the Joneses and, Florida just got much better with Brady Tkachuk, and Carolina won the cup, and Montreal's good, and Buffalo's good, Tampa's good. It's you just can't. You can't try to match what Florida did by trading for Vinny Trocheck. Cannot do it. I hope that's not the case. But as far as the first part of this equation about the Bruins losing out on Toronto's draft pick this year as butchering their offseason plans. I do agree, right? You had a 53 or 57% chance of Toronto's first round pick falling to the Bruins. And, when the Bruins made that trade, Carlo and a fourth for Minton and a first in 2026, nobody thought that Toronto was going to be a lottery team the following season. I mean, they had been a perpetual playoff team, top 10 team in the NHL for about a decade. So we all thought that when that trade happened, it was going to be a late bottom third first round pick in 2026. But then, of course, we saw what happened in Toronto this past season, and we all got a little excited. We started to see that it could be a top 5 or top 10 pick. But the reality is there was always a decent chance that Toronto was going to keep that pick once it became top 5 protected, and we saw that it was like a pretty much like a 55-45 type of swing. So yes, it sucks. If the Bruins had the 6th or 7th overall pick this June, they could have used it to draft absolutely a at least top 4, but probably top pairing guy for the next decade plus, or they could have used that as leverage, similar to what Florida did with the 9th overall pick, and then trading Samoskevich for 25 overall and packaging those 2 picks and a couple others for Brady Tkachuk. Now, even then, Brady Tkachuk wanted to go to Florida, and he forced Ottawa's hand in terms of who they were trading him to. So even that return, that package for Brady Tkachuk that's only because it was where he wanted to go, and he forced the hand. Ordinarily, you'd have to give even more for that. So I agree that Toronto winning the lottery kind of effed up Boston's plans in a way this summer. However, as Stephen A. Smith would say, I can't feel too bad for the Bruins here because, listen, you made the trade. You got Fraser Minton, but when you made the trade, you agreed to it being top 5 protected because you never thought that was going to happen, but it did. And even more so, I just don't want this to be an excuse for the Bruins because, okay, you didn't get Toronto's first round pick in 2026, but you know what? You still have 5 first round picks in the next 3 years. You have a lot of 4 second round picks. You have 4 second round picks, I think, and 4 or 5 third round picks in the next 4 or 5 years. So like the Bruins have a lot of picks here. So if they want to package a roster player or a prospect and some picks, they can do something. So listen, I agree it sucks, but you can't make that an excuse. Not that you are carb-loaded pasta. You're just acknowledging the obvious, which is, yeah, it did mess with their plans a little bit, but tough shit. Figure it out now. You still got plenty of picks and you have some roster players. You have some prospects. If you really wanted to make a splash and do something, you could if you wanted to. So they can't really play the martyr and say, oh, well, we didn't get Toronto's pick, so that sucks for us. Okay. So is life, right? Figure it out, boys. Twine Tickler 7 on YouTube says the Atlantic is an arms race. I'll give Chaika some credit, I guess. He's doing what he can to try and turn the Leafs around. Radish will have all the power play time he can handle in order to make that contract worth it. I agree with that. As far as the Bruins are concerned, I still think they go after Rasmus Andersson here. The Bruins' options to improve the team are disappearing fast. I'll be surprised if Don can pull off a creative trade that makes the Bruins better. I'm warming up to John Carlson on a 2-year deal. Other than that, we're looking at a run-it-back situation. Yuck. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I need to see Sweeney make a trade before I can believe he can. I do think it's easier for him to go out there and sign Rasmus Andersson, and I don't love that because I think Anderson's going to be a declining player probably over the better half of his contract. John Carlson, there's a lot of people who think that he's going to Tampa Bay, which honestly makes a lot of sense when you consider the fact that they did a sign and trade to not re-sign Darren Radish and send them to Toronto. So John Carlson's probably going to get a 2-year deal at $10 million a year, something like that. And I don't think it's Boston. But we'll see. Yeah, the Bruins are in a tough spot to improve their defense in a more immediate fashion because Radish is gone. I don't know if Anderson moves that much of a needle for them. I mean, he's definitely going to be an improvement over Andrew Peeke, who, by the way, the Bruins are apparently still talking to. Somehow, some way, you have Henry Jokiharju under contract still, and they're talking about bringing Andrew Peeke back. God knows why. Unless they move on from Jokiharju and they make Peeke your third right shot defenseman, maybe okay, but my goodness. So, Twine Tickler 7, I agree. I think that on defense, unless the Bruins can pull off something creative, it's tough to see exactly what they can do in an impactful way because I just don't think Rasmus Anderson is that impactful. I'll tell you, I would like to see Frederick Brunet on the Bruins next season, and if we're talking youth movement stuff. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. The good news is we'll have answers to all of this, right? Like the draft is this week. There'll be a lot of trades probably. We'll figure out what happens there. And then free agency is next Wednesday. So over the next week and a half, we'll know the majority of what the Bruins roster situation is going to be heading into training camp. So it's going to happen fast and furious here. Jack Kane on Twitter says, Bruins' current offseason mission, package some of the players who don't fit the long-term vision with draft capital to improve around the margins and get younger. Retain the top-tier draft capital and remain flexible so you can capitalize when elite talent is available. I think that's a good plan, Jack. I do. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if the Bruins try to, if there's going to be offer sheets this summer, I don't see why the Bruins wouldn't be among the teams trying to do so. So if they are going to try to go after Jason Robertson, if he's not qualified by July 1, I think the Bruins should absolutely be in on Jason Robertson. And in that case, for what he's going to make in terms of salary, you're probably looking at 4 of Boston's own first-round picks over 5 years starting in 2027. I've said this before. So theoretically, you could do your own pick in 2028, 29, 30, and 31, which means that the last 2 picks are not going to be in the NHL for probably 7 or 8 years if they ever hit. And McAvoy and Pastrnak are nearly 40 at that point. So, oh well. And then, it would suck to give up a first-round pick in 28 and 29, but can you not recuperate a first-round pick if you trade a Pavel Zacha or something like that? Like, there's ways to recuperate draft picks that you give away if you're willing to do it. So, but in that situation, you still have Higgins, you still have Minton, you still have Letourneau, you still have Cooper Simpson, Will Moore, Vasek Blanar, you still have your own first-round pick theoretically in 2026. You still have the first-round picks from Toronto and Florida in 2027, right? Or whatever year they end up being in 2028. So, but yes, outside of something like that, I'm with you. Like, I'm not moving any of the high draft collateral for anything short of a very, very high impact NHL player. And Pavel Dorofeyev is another guy. I think there was a question about him. Maybe he's a guy that the Bruins could do an offer sheet to. As I said, I think Vegas hasn't made a lot of friends around the NHL, so we'll see there. But thanks for the question, Jack. Rudy13 on YouTube. Dorofeyev, Maverick Bork, and Hayden from the RFA seem like good options if Robertson gets signed. Yep, agreed. I think that if Jason Robertson gets signed, then I don't see how they fit in Maverick Bork. However, they could trade Robertson to somebody and re-sign Bork, and if the Bruins aren't that trade partner, then now there goes Bork and Robertson. Hayton for Vegas possibly, and Pavel Dorofeyev in Vegas. So again, like the Don Sweeney's got to grow a sack this offseason. Like you can't be afraid to make enemies. It's a dog eat dog world out there. So when you're desperate, you have to be willing to upset the apple cart at times. Ryan on X says, it's over, Brian. There's no lipstick for this pig Sweeney screwed up 10 ways from Sunday. This all goes back to the 2015 draft. His final opportunity to save Pasternak's window was Eichel, and that moron wouldn't move Brandon Carlo to get it done. Blow it up. This is Hagen's team now. Yeah, I mean, I don't remember specifically the Carlo stuff with Eichel, but I mean, listen, the Bruins have made mistakes over the years. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you all what to think. If you want the Bruins to blow it up, then you're free to feel that way. I don't think that they're there right now, nor should they be. I think that they owe it to Pastrnak and McAvoy and their current top players, as well as their up-and-coming core, like your Hagans and your Minton, and eventually your Laternos and your Zellers, to see what they could all be together. I think it would be a mistake not to there is overlap here. Charlie McAvoy is 28 years old. David Pastrnak just turned 30. So in a couple of years, like if it's going south and they want out, fine. But right now, I think everybody owes it to the situation to see if the young can, mature and play alongside the current, core. Like, I if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But right now, I think it's a little too premature to blow it up. Seth on YouTube says, I don't think there's anyone worthwhile the Bruins can realistically expect to acquire this offseason, defenseman or otherwise. The few players they could actually trade for come at such an exorbitant cost in draft picks and prospects that it simply wouldn't be worth their while. The correct approach would be to draft wisely, continue developing their young talent, and be okay with possibly being a mediocre team for the next 2 or 3 seasons while that happens. And who knows, next summer, there may well be better free agents and trades that they can actually make. The one transaction they can and must make right now is to trade or buy out Korpisalo. All right, couple of things here. I don't totally disagree that drafting wisely and continuing to develop young talent isn't the way to go. But have the Bruins shown consistently enough that they're good at that? They're getting better at it, I think, with, Laterno and Hagans, like those guys, those are good examples. Minton was drafted outside the organization, Husadinov outside the organization, Zellers outside the organization, but I think that they're clearly getting a little bit better at it. But here's the thing. The whole part about being okay with being mediocre for the next 2 or 3 seasons, that's a tough pitch. That's a tough pitch to McAvoy and Pastrnak. So to the last comment, that's the fine line that they're trying to the tightrope they're trying to walk right now. Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak, I think they'd be willing to accept not being a contender next year as long as they're getting better and that they see the team growing to where it can be. But to be mediocre knowingly for the next 3 years, you're gonna have upset stars. It's gonna happen. It might not happen in October of 2026, but it might happen in 27 or 28 when they're in their early 30s. So just be cautious there. Be cautious. Ultimately, I'm along those same lines. I would, and I've said it before, and I've said it on the show today, I would be willing to offer sheet Jason Robertson for a couple of first-round picks that are 5 years from now, and a couple of other ones that are, 2 and 3 years from now, but you could still try to recuperate draft picks along the way with some other trades. But in terms of their current top prospects and like their immediate first-round picks, like this week and such, like, yeah, I'm keeping those, want to use those. But the whole pitch to be mediocre for the next 2 or 3 seasons, even though it's probably going to be their reality, yeah, just know that they're not going to be immune to top players the way this league's going, asking for trades. It's just, don't be surprised if they miss the playoffs for a year or 2, or they're one and dones, that their top players don't ask out. Because don't look now, but the Bruins making the playoffs this coming season, I think, is a massive uphill battle. Massive. So just be aware. This is from NK 2012 on YouTube. Do you think Dorofeyev is a good consolation prize if missing out on Robertson? I do. Absolutely. Like, I think Pavel Dorofeyev is somebody that somebody is probably going to target with an offer sheet unless Vegas locks them up beforehand. So, if Robertson re-signs in Dallas or gets traded elsewhere, I think the Bruins would absolutely, look at Pavel Dorofeyev. 25 years old, clearly has a knack for scoring, Sure, why not? Right? But I'm telling you, the Bruins, they have to act fast. Whatever they decide to do, whether it's a massive swing like a Jason Robertson, or it's a smaller trade on upside for like a Kent Johnson or a Mason McTavish or an Olin Zellweger, like these teams are going to be acting. So you can't be caught with your thumb up your ass. Like you have to be aggressive. You have to know what you want and go for it. And I haven't seen Don Sweeney be a very active summertime, trade GM where he's beating other GMs to the punch. The Pavel Zacha, Eric Holla one was great. I think we all agree with that one. But outside of that, I need to see Don Sweeney be aggressive and assertive in the trade market to really believe that he will. So the great news is that we will find all of this out soon enough. As I said, the next week and a half is going to be incredibly telling, and I will be here all of the while to talk about it. So that'll do it for this episode. We will be back later on this week to talk about any player movement that may happen before then, and we will talk about the NHL draft and who the Bruins may select at 23 overall, if that indeed is where they're still selecting as of recording on Friday. Okay, so we will get to a draft preview on Friday for the draft on Friday night, and all hell will break loose over the weekend, and I'll be back next week to break that all down as well, with free agency happening on Wednesday. So thank you all very much for listening. Enjoy your week, and I'll talk to you on Friday.